Sometimes a person had to face it, sit with it, and learn something from it. But she was not sure what she was supposed to do or what lesson she was meant to learn. All she knew was that the man deserved better than how she treated him. Throughout the morning, she kept recalling how he spoke, the softness in his voice, the calm way he explained himself, the kindness he showed despite how she reacted toward him. It bothered her even more when she remembered how she had judged him so quickly, based only on his appearance and her own assumptions. She felt small, and she did not like feeling that way as she prepared to leave for work. She hesitated at the door, wishing somehow she could apologize to him, but she did not know his name, where he lived, or anything else about him. All she knew was that he had been on that flight and that her words had hurt him. She hoped he had brushed it off and forgotten it, but deep down she doubted that. Words often stayed with people longer than others realized. At work, she found it hard to focus. Her coworkers noticed she was quieter than usual. They asked her if she was feeling okay, but she simply nodded and smiled weakly. She didn't feel like explaining the whole story, because she knew that saying it aloud would make her feel even worse. So she stayed quiet and moved through the day with a heavy heart. During lunch break, she sat alone, something she rarely did. She watched people passing by, noticing small things about them, how they smiled, how they walked, how they interacted with others. She thought about how everyone carried their own stories, their own struggles, and how easy it was to forget that when someone looked different or acted in a way she didn't expect. It struck her deeply that she had failed to remember this simple truth during that flight. As the day went on, her regret only grew stronger. She wanted to do something about it, something that showed she truly meant to change. But she couldn't apologize to the man directly, so she began thinking of a different way to make things right. She wasn't sure what that meant yet, but she knew she wanted to do something meaningful. When she finally returned home that evening, she opened her window to let the cool air in. The city lights glowed softly in the distance. She leaned on the windowsill and thought quietly. She wondered what the man was doing at that moment. Was he spending time with his family? Was he traveling again? Did he even remember her at all? She hoped he was doing well, wherever he was, that night. As she wrote in her notebook, something she hadn't done in a long time, she tried to put her feelings into simple words. She wrote about judging someone too quickly, about assumptions that hurt people, and about learning to slow down before forming opinions. She wrote honestly, without holding back, letting her thoughts shape themselves into something clearer. While she wrote, she began to understand what she had to do next. It wasn't about finding the man or apologizing directly. It was about becoming the kind of person who wouldn't make the same mistake again. It was about changing her mindset, choosing kindness, and being more careful with her words. And it felt like the first step towards something better. She closed her notebook, took a deep breath, and felt a small but real sense of relief. Not everything was fixed yet. She had finally started moving in the right direction. The next morning arrived quietly, with a soft light spreading across the sky and touching the city in a gentle way. She woke up feeling different, not lighter exactly, but more aware of herself, her thoughts, and the world around her. The guilt she had been carrying for days had softened a little, like a heavy coat she had unbuttoned but still wore. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how far she had come since that day on the plane. It amazed her how a single moment, a single misunderstanding, could change a person so deeply. She got ready slowly, choosing not to rush. There was something peaceful about taking her time that morning, something steady and grounding. She made tea, stood by the window, and watched people start their day. Some walked quickly, some slowly, some looked tired, and some looked excited. She wondered what stories they carried, what moments shaped them, and how many times in their lives they had been judged unfairly. Just like the man she had met, a thought came to her. Maybe the world would be softer if people learned to see each other with more patience, more understanding. She wished she had learned that lesson earlier, but she was grateful she learned it now. The day passed quietly until afternoon, when something unexpected happened. She received a call from her workplace. Her manager asked if she could come earlier the next day, because there was going to be a small community event they were helping organize. She agreed without thinking much of it, but after the call ended, she began wondering what kind of event it might be. Her workplace did not usually take part in community activities, but she liked the idea of being involved. That night, she prepared her things and went to bed early, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and calmness. The next morning, she walked to the event space her workplace had prepared. It was a small hall decorated with simple banners and bright posters. The event was about awareness, kindness, and the importance of treating people with respect without judgment. When she saw the title written on one of the posters, she froze. Every person has a story you cannot see. Her heart skipped a beat. She walked closer, her eyes reading the words again and again. It felt like the poster was speaking directly to her. People around her were arranging chairs, placing water bottles on tables, and organizing small pamphlets. She stood still for a moment, feeling the message sink into her. Her manager walked up to her and explained that the speaker planned to talk about understanding others, learning from mistakes, and giving people the space to be themselves. It felt strange how closely it matched everything she had been feeling the past few days. By late morning, guests began entering. She guided people to their seats, greeted them politely, and felt a sense of responsibility in her role that she had never felt before. She wanted this event to mean something. Then something happened that made her breath catch. Among the guests walking into the hall, she saw a familiar face, a familiar posture, a familiar calm expression. It was him, the man from the plane. He was holding a folder, greeting the organizers as he walked toward the front of the hall. For a moment, she felt her heart stop. She stood frozen, not knowing what to do. The person she had hurt, the person she had regretted judging, was right in front of her again. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched him take his place near the stage. She didn't know whether to go to him, stay where she was, or walk away. But she knew one thing: this moment was not an accident. Life had brought her here for a reason. After a moment of hesitation, she took a deep breath and walked toward him. Every step felt heavy yet necessary. When she reached him, he turned and looked at her with mild surprise. He smiled politely, not in a way that said he remembered her, but in a kind and respectful way, the same way he had behaved on the plane. She swallowed and spoke softly. "I think we've met before," she said. He looked at her carefully, his eyes searching for recognition. Then his expression changed slightly, and he nodded. "Yes. On the flight," he said gently. She felt her face warm. "I wanted to apologize. I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did. I judged you too quickly, and I've regretted it ever since. I'm really sorry." He listened quietly, not interrupting, not rushing to respond. When she finished speaking, there was a small pause. Then he smiled, a warm, sincere smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "It takes courage to say that, and I appreciate it more than you think." She felt her shoulders relax for the first time in days. He continued, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." His words felt like a gentle light inside her, easing the last bit of weight she had been carrying before she could say anything else. The event organizer called him to the stage. She stepped back, watching him walk forward with grace and confidence. When he began speaking, she listened with her full attention. He talked about seeing people beyond their appearance, understanding struggles that are invisible, and choosing compassion over assumption. His voice was calm, honest, and humble. Every word he said felt like something she needed to hear, something she wished she had known earlier. As he spoke, she felt herself change a little more, understanding that life had handed her a rare chance, a chance to grow, to become someone better, someone who thought before reacting when the event ended. He walked to her again. "It was good seeing you," he said kindly. "You too," she replied softly. "And thank you for everything you said up there." He nodded and gave her one last warm smile before joining the other organizers. She watched him leave the hall, feeling something deep inside her settle peacefully. Not every story in life ends with dramatic twists or loud emotions. Some end quietly, with understanding, growth, and a promise to do better. As she stepped outside into the bright afternoon light, she felt lighter than she had in days. She felt grateful, grateful for the mistake she made, grateful for the chance to meet him again. And grateful for the lesson that would stay with her for the rest of her life, she walked home with a soft smile, knowing she would never judge a stranger so quickly again. It was a warm afternoon when the long-distance bus pulled into the crowded station. People rushed in every direction, dragging bags, calling out to family members, and trying to secure a seat before the bus filled up. Amid all the noise and movement, the attendant stood near the door, checking tickets with a tired but practiced expression. She had been working since early morning, and this was her last trip of the day. All she wanted was for everything to go smoothly so she could finally rest. As she helped passengers step in and find their seats, she noticed someone approaching the bus at a slow, uneven pace. He looked like he had barely slept in days. His hair was messy, his clothes were simple, and his backpack looked old and worn, as though it had been dragged through a long journey. The attendant stared at him for a moment, and an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. She did not know who he was or where he had come from, but something about his appearance made her suspicious. Maybe it was the tired look in his eyes, or the way he seemed unsure of himself as he stepped toward the bus. Whatever the reason, she immediately assumed he would be trouble. She didn't even realize she was judging him so quickly. It simply happened, almost like a habit she had formed from dealing with difficult passengers in the past. The man reached the bus door and offered his ticket with a quiet greeting. His voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid of taking up too much space or making too much noise. The attendant took the ticket without returning the greeting. She barely even looked him in the eye. Her mind was already running with thoughts. Asterisk, he'll probably complain. He looks like someone who didn't plan his day. Maybe he'll ask for special treatment. Asterisk, she waved him inside, wanting him to move quickly so the bus could leave on time. He stepped in and slowly made his way toward the back. Instead of settling into a seat near the front like most people, he kept walking until he reached the last row. He placed his worn backpack beside him and sat down with a tired sigh. The attendant watched all of this. From her place near the front door, she didn't like how quietly he moved. Passengers who acted too quiet made her nervous. She preferred those who asked questions openly, who showed what they wanted or needed. People who stayed silent were harder to read. That made her uneasy. As she continued checking tickets for the remaining passengers, her mind kept circling back to him. She wondered why he didn't shave, why his clothes looked like he had worn them for days, and why he stared out the window with such a distant expression. She convinced herself that he must be hiding something. By the time the last passenger boarded and the bus engine started, she had already built a story in her mind. She believed he was irresponsible, maybe even careless. She thought he might cause problems later in the trip. She decided to keep an eye on him. The bus rolled out of the station and onto the main road. Most passengers settled in quickly, adjusting their seats, plugging in earphones, or chatting quietly with people beside them. But the man in the back stayed silent. He took a small notebook from his backpack and opened it on his lap. His fingers moved slowly over the pages, as if he were reading something important. Sometimes he nodded to himself, and sometimes he pressed his hand to his forehead. Looking as though he was deep in thought, the attendant glanced at him through the small mirror above her seat. Her suspicion grew stronger. Asterisk, why is he whispering to himself? What's inside that notebook? Why does he look so worried? She didn't consider that he might simply be tired or stressed from something personal. Her mind only focused on the negative possibilities. About half an hour into the journey, the man shifted in his seat and looked toward the front of the bus. He seemed restless, as though he wanted to ask something but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he stood up slowly, holding the top of the seat for balance as the bus moved along the uneven road. Seeing him stand up made the attendant tense. She didn't like it when passengers walked around while the bus was moving, especially people she already didn't trust. As he began walking toward her, she stiffened and prepared herself for a problem. He approached politely and asked in a soft voice if she knew how long it would take to reach the next stop. It was a simple, harmless question, but the attendant's mind was already set. She cut him off quickly, her tone sharp and impatient. She told him to return to his seat and wait like everyone else. The man blinked in surprise, his shoulders tightening as though her words had pushed him back. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded, murmured an apology, and walked back toward his seat. But the small encounter left a strange tension in the air. A few people nearby had noticed the tone she used, and they exchanged glances. The attendant felt their eyes on her, but she brushed it away. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. She believed she was preventing trouble before it even started. But deep down, a small, quiet voice inside her wondered if she had been too harsh. She pushed that thought aside. She had seen enough difficult passengers in her job to trust her instincts. She told herself as the bus continued moving through long stretches of highway, the attendant kept glancing back at the man. Every time he shifted or lifted his notebook, her suspicion returned. She even imagined scenarios where he might cause a disturbance, though nothing he did suggested he planned anything at all. Hours passed. People relaxed, dozed off, or watched the scenery outside their windows. But the attendant couldn't relax. Her mind stayed busy, replaying her earlier assumptions and building on them. She didn't realize how unfair it was. She didn't know that her judgment was nothing more than a guess one, made in a moment of tiredness and impatience. The man remained quiet for the entire time. He looked out the window, wrote something in his notebook, then stared at the pages again. Sometimes his eyes filled with sadness, like someone thinking about a problem he didn't know how to solve. But the attendant never saw that. She only saw what she expected to see, a passenger who didn't belong. As the sun began setting, painting the sky in soft orange light, the bus entered a more isolated road. Trees lined both sides, and there were fewer signs of towns or houses. The evening breeze carried a sense of calm, but inside the attendant, there was still an uneasy feeling. She didn't know that the journey would soon take an unexpected turn. She didn't know that her assumptions were about to be challenged in a way she'd never imagined. And she definitely didn't know that the man she judged so quickly would become the very person she relied on. But for now, all she saw was a stranger with a worn backpack, a tired face, and a quiet voice someone she believed was a problem. Before he even had a chance to speak, the bus kept moving along the long, straight road, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the seats. Most passengers were either sleeping or quietly looking outside, but the attendant couldn't stop glancing toward the back row. Every time she caught sight of the man with the worn backpack, a new wave of uneasiness rolled through her. She didn't understand why she felt that way. Nothing he did was actually wrong. But once she had formed an opinion, everything he did seemed suspicious in her eyes. After a while, the man shifted in his seat again. He opened his notebook, flipped through a few pages, then closed it and held it against his chest. His eyes moved slowly across the bus, as though he was thinking about something important. Then he stood up, stretching his legs carefully so he didn't bump into the seats around him. The attendant noticed instantly. She stiffened, pressing her lips together as she watched him approach. The bus shook slightly as it rolled over a rough patch of road, but that didn't stop her from narrowing her eyes and preparing herself. He walked down the aisle with slow, steady steps. His hands were tucked close to his sides, trying not to disturb anyone else. When he reached her, he stood politely at a small distance. Waiting for her attention, instead of forcing it, he opened his mouth to speak. But before he could finish a single sentence, she interrupted him. Her voice was sharper than she intended. Her words cut the air like a quick slap. "I told you to stay seated," she said. Not even giving him time to explain, several nearby passengers glanced in their direction again. Some looked confused, others uncomfortable, but no one said anything. The man blinked a few times, his expression tightening from surprise. He wasn't angry, only hurt. His voice came out small and careful when he tried again. "I'm sorry. It's just, I think my seat window is stuck. I wanted to ask if you had something that could help open." The attendant didn't let him finish. "No, go sit down. The bus is in motion. You shouldn't be walking around right now." Her tone was final, like a door slamming shut. The man closed his notebook slowly, lowering his eyes. He gave a small nod, more out of politeness than agreement, and quietly turned around. He walked back to his seat without another word. As he sat down, he pushed his window gently again, as if hoping it would open this time. It didn't. He sighed, rested his head against the glass, and stared outside as a line of tall trees blurred past. The attendant watched him from the mirror for a moment. A tiny corner of her heart felt guilty. Maybe she shouldn't have spoken so sharply, but her tired mind argued back. It's better to be strict than deal with problems later. She convinced herself that she was only doing her job, but her assumptions didn't stop. Everything he did felt like proof of the story she had created in her head. When he touched his backpack, she wondered what he was reaching for. When he leaned forward to take something out, she tensed up again. When he whispered to himself while reading from his notebook, she imagined he was planning something. Her thoughts spun in circles, turning harmless actions into reasons for suspicion. It wasn't logical, but once she decided someone was trouble, her mind tried to find evidence everywhere at one point. The man checked his pockets, first his front pockets, then the side ones of his backpack. He looked worried, as though he couldn't find something he needed. He searched quickly, flipping through pages of his notebook and lifting items from his bag. The attendant noticed and immediately assumed the worst. She leaned slightly forward in her seat, eyes locked onto him. Her heartbeat picked up speed. Asterisk. Why is he searching like that? Did he misplace something important? Is he hiding something? Her imagination ran wild. But in reality, the man was simply looking for a small pen that had slipped under his seat. He eventually found it and let out a quiet sigh of relief. Meanwhile, the attendant sat frozen, convinced that he had just done something suspicious, even though nothing had happened at all. Few passengers noticed the tension too. A woman sitting in the middle rows whispered to the person beside her, wondering why the attendant seemed so stressed. But the moment passed, and soon everyone returned to their own thoughts. Time passed slowly. The bus entered a stretch of empty land where there were no houses, no shops, and barely any signs. Just long stretches of road, scattered trees, and quiet silence. The sky started to change. The bright blue fading into a softer tone as evening approached. The man leaned forward and placed his notebook on his knees. He rubbed his eyes tiredly, then looked around the bus with a heavy breath. His face had a sadness that wasn't easy to hide. It was the kind of sadness that came from carrying too much inside worries. Memories, unanswered questions, but the attendant didn't see that. She only saw the way he kept glancing around. She assumed he was nervous or planning something. Each time he moved, she grew more alert. When he shifted in his seat again, she reacted as if bracing for trouble. Her fingers tightened around the armrest. Her eyes sharpened. She didn't even realize that her tension was built from nothing more than guesswork. A little later, he stood up once more. This time he walked toward the front slowly, almost reluctantly. He stopped halfway, looking like he wanted to speak, but wasn't sure how to start. The attendant exhaled sharply, annoyed. "What now?" she asked, her voice carrying across the bus. Some passengers turned their heads again. The man swallowed, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I just wanted to ask if we're close to the next stop," he said gently. "I need to make a call when we get there." The attendant didn't soften. "I said before you need to sit down. You're not supposed to walk around when the bus is moving. Please go back to your seat." Her words hit him harder this time. His shoulders slumped. He gave a slow nod and stepped back, walking down the aisle in silence. He sat down and pressed his hands against his notebook, staring at the pages, even though he wasn't reading anymore. The air inside the bus grew heavier. Even though no one spoke about it, the atmosphere shifted. A sense of awkwardness lingered from the exchange. The attendant tried to focus on her duties, but her mind kept drifting back to him. She replayed the scene again and again, convincing herself that she had handled it correctly. She believed he was being difficult, even though all he did was ask simple questions. But beneath her confidence, a small tug of discomfort pulled at her. Something didn't feel right. She didn't want to admit it, but a part of her felt she had judged him too quickly. She pushed the thought away again. The man didn't get up anymore after that. He stayed seated, quiet and still. His body language changed. He wasn't restless now. He looked defeated. He stared outside with a distant gaze, like someone thinking about something painful. Sometimes he closed his eyes and took slow breaths, as though trying to calm himself. If the attendant had looked closely, she might have seen the truth. She might have noticed the tiredness wasn't caused by irresponsibility, but by something deeper. She might have seen the sadness lingering on his face, but she didn't look closely. She only looked through the lens of her assumptions. The bus continued down the quiet road as the sky grew dimmer. A soft orange glow covered everything, turning the world outside peaceful and warm. But inside the bus, tension still lingered like a shadow. The man rested his head against the window, watching the landscape pass by in a blur. His thoughts drifted somewhere far away toward a call he needed to make, toward someone waiting for him, toward a situation he hadn't shared with anyone. He didn't know that the attendant had already made up her mind about him. He didn't know she misunderstood every move he made. All he wanted was to reach the next stop and make a simple phone call. The bus rolled along, aware that the silence between them was only the beginning. Neither of them knew that the journey ahead would test them both, revealing truths that would change everything they thought they knew. The road stretched ahead like a long, quiet ribbon, disappearing into the evening light. The sky had turned a soft blend of orange and pink, and the shadows grew longer as the bus entered an even more deserted stretch of highway. Inside, everything was calm on the surface, passengers resting, a few whispering softly, and the low hum of the engine filling the air. But underneath that calm, something else was building. The attendant sat in her seat, staring out the front window, hoping the next stop wasn't too far. She felt drained, her thoughts looping back again and again to the man sitting at the back. Even though he hadn't moved since their last conversation, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling clinging to her like a heavy coat. She didn't know why she felt so tense, but once she had decided he was suspicious, her mind refused to let go. Minutes passed quietly. The bus bounced slightly over a rough section of road, making a few passengers shift in their seats. The driver muttered something under his breath and adjusted the steering wheel. Everything seemed normal, calm, predictable. Then, without warning, a strange sound broke through the steady rhythm of the engine. It was faint at first, just a low groan, like metal being pushed too hard. The driver frowned and leaned forward slightly. The attendant lifted her head, her eyes narrowing. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a sudden jolt that made several passengers gasp. The man in the back straightened quickly, gripping the seat in front of him. The bus shuddered, and a rattling noise filled the air. The engine began to cough, sputter, and then growl in an uneven tone. "What's happening?" someone murmured. The attendant stood up instantly, her heart skipping. "Everything's fine," she said, though her voice trembled ever so slightly. "Please remain seated." But everything was not fine. Another loud knock sounded from beneath the bus, followed by a sudden jerk that threw everyone forward. A few passengers shouted in surprise, and one dropped their bag as they tried to grab onto something. The driver pulled the bus to the side of the road, struggling with the wheel as the vehicle slowed down. Dust rose around them as the tires rolled over gravel and uneven ground. Finally, with one last coughing sound, the engine died completely. Silence flooded the bus. The only sound that remained was the soft ticking of the cooling. Engine passengers whispered anxiously among themselves. Some looked out the windows, realizing how isolated the area was. There were no houses, no shops, no passing cars, just empty land stretching into the horizon. The attendant felt her stomach drop. This was the last thing she wanted. A broken-down bus meant delays, questions, complaints, and possible arguments. It also meant dealing with a situation she wasn't prepared for. The driver tried turning the key again. The engine made a weak attempt at life before going silent. He sighed heavily, wiped his forehead, and stood up. "We've got a problem," he announced quietly. Those words spread through the bus like a wave. Passengers turned toward the front, eyes wide with concern. The attendant tried to keep her voice steady as she asked, "What kind of problem?" "Engine issue," the driver said. "Not sure what exactly yet. I need to check it," without waiting for further questions. He stepped out of the bus. The attendant followed him to the door, her heart pounding. She glanced back at the passengers, trying to offer a reassuring smile, even though she felt none of it inside. "Please stay in your seats," she told them. "We'll update you shortly." She stepped outside after the driver, and the cool evening air hit her face. The surroundings were painfully quiet. She could hear the sound of insects, the distant breeze, and her own breathing. The sky had darkened more. The sun was sinking rapidly. The driver opened the engine compartment at the back of the bus and leaned in, examining parts with a serious expression. The attendant hovered nearby, worried. "Is it bad?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Can't say yet. But it doesn't look good." Inside the bus, passengers shifted nervously, some standing to look out of the windows. And then something unexpected happened. The man from the back row stood up. He hesitated for a moment, glancing around as if unsure whether he should get involved. But when he saw the worried faces and the driver struggling alone, something in his expression changed. He made his way toward the front. Moving slowly so he didn't alarm anyone, the attendant stepped back into the bus just as he approached. Her eyes widened in irritation. "What are you doing?" She snapped before she could help herself. He paused, his voice quiet but steady. "I thought I could help." "I heard the engine trouble. You need to sit down," she said sharply. "Please don't make things worse." His brows pulled together, not angrily, but with confusion. "I'm not trying to make things worse. I only want to see if I can help the driver." "I have experience with," she cut him off, her tone hard. "Just return to your seat." Her voice echoed inside the bus, and several passengers flinched slightly at the intensity of it. For a moment, the man looked like he might say something else. Instead, he simply nodded slowly. But before he turned away, one of the passengers nearby spoke up. "Maybe let him try," the older man said. "The driver seems stuck, and we're in the middle of nowhere." Another person added, "Doesn't hurt to let him look." Whispers spread among the passengers, and the attendant felt pressure building around her. She swallowed hard, her stubbornness pushing against her uncertainty. She looked outside at the driver, who seemed frustrated and tired as he wiped his hands on a cloth. Finally, with a tense breath, she stepped aside. "Fine," she said reluctantly, "but don't touch anything you shouldn't." The man nodded once, grateful for the chance. He walked calmly past her and stepped outside. Heading toward the rear of the bus, the attendant watched him, her arms crossed tightly, a mix of fear, annoyance, and something else, something she didn't want to name, rumbled in her chest. Outside, the man approached the driver with a polite nod. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked gently. The driver sized him up for a moment, then sighed and stepped aside. "If you think you can spot something, go ahead." The man leaned over the engine, studying the parts carefully. His posture changed. No more nervousness, no more hesitation. It was like watching a different person. He checked wires, valves, and connections with practiced hands. Touching each part with a kind of familiarity, the attendant stood near the bus door, watching with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. She didn't understand what she was seeing. She had assumed he was careless, irresponsible, unsure of himself, but the way he moved now, steady, focused, knowledgeable, didn't match any of the ideas she had formed about him. After a few minutes, he straightened up and wiped his hands on his pants. "I think I found the issue," he said. The driver looked at him with surprise. "Already?" He pointed to a loose connection near the side of the engine. "This part isn't fixed properly. It can cause the engine to overheat and shut down. If we tighten it and secure a seal around this area, it should hold long enough to get us to the next service station." The driver blinked, impressed. "You sure?" He nodded. "I've seen it before. I can try to fix it if you want." For the first time since the breakdown, the driver looked relieved. "Please, go ahead." The attendant felt her chest tighten as she watched him work. Part of her wanted to trust what she was seeing, but another part, the stubborn part, clung to the story she had built earlier. Passengers inside the bus leaned toward the windows. Watching the scene with growing interest, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small tool, something he had kept tucked away beneath his notebook, something she never expected him to have. It wasn't fancy, but it was useful. Within minutes, he fixed the connection, tightened the loose part, and secured it using a small strip he carried. His movements were confident, efficient, and steady. When he finished, He stepped back, wiped his hands again, and said, "Try it now." The driver got into the bus and turned the key. For a moment, the engine hesitated, then it roared back to life. A wave of relief swept through the bus. Passengers clapped softly, some cheering. The driver grinned and leaned out of the window. "You did it," he said, shaking his head in amazement. The man gave a small smile, humble and quiet. "It should hold for now. Just avoid forcing the engine too hard until we reach the next stop." The attendant stood frozen. Her throat tightened. She felt something uncomfortable stir inside her. Guilt. The man didn't look at her for praise or thanks. He simply glanced at the bus, then at the open road ahead. As though he was thinking about something far beyond this moment, the driver walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," he said warmly. "You saved us a lot of trouble." The man nodded softly. "Happy to help." Inside the bus, passengers murmured with relief. A few even praised him openly, but the attendant stood there silently, watching everything unfold. Her earlier judgments hung heavy in her mind. She didn't know what to say, how to respond, or how to undo the way she had treated him. She didn't know that this was only the beginning of the lesson. Waiting for her, she didn't know that the simple act of judging someone too quickly would soon turn into something she would never forget. The day after the tense moment on the plane, she woke up with a strange heaviness inside her chest. It was not the kind that came from tiredness or lack of sleep. It was the weight a person feels when they know they have done something wrong and cannot escape the memory of it. She lay still for a while, staring at the ceiling, playing the man's face in her mind and the silence that followed her harsh judgment. It was quiet in her apartment, except for the distant sound of cars moving along the street below. She sat up slowly and rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the thoughts, but they stayed with her. She had always seen herself as a calm, fair person, someone who treated people with respect no matter who they were. But the way she acted on that flight did not match the person she believed she was. This realization made her feel even worse. She wished she could go back in time and talk to the man again. But things in real life did not work that way. She made tea and tried to distract herself by checking her messages. But everything seemed dull compared to the feeling she was stuck with. She knew that guilt did not go away by ignoring it.